Power.
Call in the cavalry.
Tactics.
Bring back the archers.
Economy.
Build up the farmland.
Combat.
Send in the clowns.
The real-time strategy game. If you're a certain type of gamer of a certain age, you grew up on these. You probably still have a favourite. For me, it's Rome Total War 2, with Sins of a Solar Empire a close second. But do you know what the last Total War release was? I had to look it up. Have you even played an RTS game that's less than 10 years old? Do you know that since 2014, when Game of the Year was formalised, not a single RTS game has even been nominated, let alone won? And yet in the RTS heyday, they were frequently marketed with Game of the Year editions. Nearly all the games you thought of when I said RTS are probably 20 years old. And if not, the series they're part of is. So if I want to order vast armies, build cities, command fleets, and I don't want to wait for my opponent to take their damn time with their turn, Toby,
Build up the farmland.
why do I have to go back to a genre that hasn't changed in over a decade?
The phrase real-time strategy started as a buzzy catchphrase to market the 1992 game Dune 2, a game that sits you as one of three great houses trying to take control of the spice planet Arrakis. The gameplay has you harvesting spice and then converting it into money, and then controlling the spending of that money on different troops to battle your opponents. This core gameplay loop becomes absolutely essential to the entire genre for decades to come. Dune 2 kickstarts what could be known as the Silver Age of RTS games. Entries in the genre like Warcraft, Orcs and Humans in 1994 and Command & Conquer in 1995 brought RTS games to the masses, adding multiplayer, campaigns, more buildings and units, and more differences in asymmetry between the factions. All this is the seasoning that made the RTS soup a smashing success. And both games have spawned franchises that dominated the market for years. The next few years saw loads of great new titles in the genre, from the weirder and wackier Dungeon Keeper to the market-dominating Age of Empires. These games develop and forward RTS games, but stick very much to the core genre. It's only from 1999 into the early 2000s that things start to change in a big way. With the rise in popularity and accessibility of the third dimension! Maybe it's an overstatement to call the 3Dification of RTS games a huge change. The core gameplay under the bonnet is essentially the same, but it definitely contributed to a big step for the genre. During this time, almost every popular RTS franchise gets what many fans call the definitive sequel. Warcraft 3, StarCraft 2, Age of Empires 2, Command & Conquer Red Alert, and many, many more. We also get loads of new entries to the genre, like Age of Mythology, Dawn of War, Sins of a Solar Empire, Lord of the Rings, Battle for Middle-earth, and the now incredibly expansive Total War series. All of these games stand on the shoulders of those that came before, enhancing the gameplay with new features or technical improvements, and then setting it into an exciting new time or place. This was truly a good time to be a fan of the RTS game. But like all good things, this time too passed. Often we at Hoopsnake herald the modding community as being one of the best parts of any game, giving new content and extending the lifespan of most games. However, when it comes to the RTS, I believe it may have been modders that killed the genre. Defense of the Ancients, or DOTA as it's more commonly known, began life as a Warcraft 3 mod, taking the core gameplay systems and reworking them into something where players control a single character each and battle for supremacy across a map with lanes and towers to defend. This quickly grew into the first multiplayer online battle arena, an entirely new genre, one that appealed to a very similar audience to the RTS game, but offering them something new and refreshing to the game that they've been playing for the last decade or more. With an audience divided and far more ways to monetize a MOBA than an RTS game, the new genre quickly overtook its progenitor in popularity. I can't help but wonder if this isn't one of the reasons why the RTS game is made far less commonly now than the ever-present MOBA. Was the day Defense of the Ancients was released in 2003 the day that the RTS genre gasped its last gasp?
Fundamental to RTS games is creating a sense of power. One person able to control entire armies and civilizations, with tensions kept high by the ever-ticking clock. You cannot do everything perfectly. You must make sacrifices in order to secure victory. Whether that's a reduction in economic efficiency in order to outmaneuver your opponent on the military battlefield, or the rush for a new technology that would put you ahead once complete, but leaves you vulnerable while it's set up. There are two major axes of RTS games that players can sink their teeth into: the single-player campaign and the multiplayer scene, which can often be highly competitive. This is perhaps best exemplified in my two favourites of the genre, Age of Empires 2 and Homeworld. Both have excellent campaigns. Age of Empires' historical setting explores a variety of factual events, and Homeworld's story of a lost colony searching for home in a vast, hostile galaxy expertly draws the player in. But it is only Age of Empires that has an ever-waxing and waning competitive scene. Its precise unit control, large array of buildings, and a resource system requiring careful balance gives a player lots to focus on throughout the game. This is a field where mastery of juggling simple mechanics is greatly rewarded and equally rewarding to learn. The game then adds bountiful civilizations and map types that provide the wheat to create a scene where multiple playstyles can shine. No chaff. The world of competitive Age of Empires is captivating, with some players that favour highly aggressive, micromanagement-heavy military gameplay, and others with relatively poor action speed but tremendous ability to balance their economy and create an army that can overwhelm their opponents. I'm wonderful at all of it. I'm good at all of it. I don't claim to be a top-class Homeworld player, but Homeworld and its sequels, for me, sit at the other side of the RTS spectrum. In multiplayer, they forgo a lot of the need for skill in macroeconomy by singling down to one resource type. This in turn allows you to focus on positioning, information gathering, and fleet composition. It's a simpler game with fixed maps and only 2 playable races, at least without mods, but that creates breathing space for the battles, which are a beautiful spectacle. For the competitive side, many RTS titles are deep, intricate games that take a long time to master, but for all of them, it could be just as fun to load it up, smash 2 armies into each other, and enjoy the show.
So what lets down the genre? Why hasn't it changed? True, it can be argued that there are more monetizable avenues that appeal to the same player base, but I think another aspect that hurts it, the RTS, it's had most of the innovation squeezed out. You guessed it, I'm going to say it again, the genre's hit the limits. And the most tangible of those limits is that it is real time. There's an inherent limit on the capacity of a human being to react and manage resources and do things. When Google trained its AI DeepMind to play StarCraft 2, it artificially limited its actions per minute to be comparable with top human players. That's about 200 to 300 actions per minute APM. For us normies, we can only dream of such prowess. We're sitting around 50 APM, let alone 100. And you're even more screwed if you're trying to play on controller. This has led some of the few recent entries in the genre, take Company of Heroes 3, to steer away from real-time strategy. Company of Heroes added the tactical pause function that lets you pause the gameplay when it's too overwhelming. We've hit the limit of what a player can actually manage in real time. Okay, what about bots? More challenging opponents for people to play in the campaigns. You know, we kind of cracked these in the 2010s. I mentioned Google's DeepMind AI, but even before that we had bots that could give players a real run for their money and give challenging gameplay. And then on the multiplayer front, players are players. They're already pretty good. Again, Company of Heroes shines forth as an attempt at innovation. What it tried to do is give characterizations to sub-commanders on the field, which meant that you could anticipate their moves because they had a slightly different personality to the other commanders, and that was supposed to add interest, but that feature was not particularly well reviewed. So what else is there left to improve? Well, there's graphics, but the Romans in Rome Total War 2 from the 2000s look pretty good. How much added value is there to making them shinier and prettier? If that was the only thing that stopped RTS games being relevant, a lack of graphical innovation, why didn't these games take off? Clearly the gameplay is the bit that's stagnant, not the graphics. And they kind of were good enough. Whereas first-person shooters continue to push the boundary. Compare Halo Combat Evolved, a contemporary of many of the RTS classics, to Halo 5, and you see a massive difference. Various games have tried to change this up with setting. Vast spaceborne empires and ancient civilizations have all taken center stage in the RTS genre, but apart from the very notable Company of Heroes, the 20th and 21st centuries have been largely ignored. Alternate histories of these times, very common, but the actual real conflicts, notably absent. And I think this is in part because of how well we know the histories of this time. And with the dawn of YouTube and quite niche content, this is a knowledge that we're gaining of more and more time as well. Abstracting combat when people know the history of these times better and better becomes more and more challenging, especially in a genre like RTS, where real-time and simulation are often a selling point. We run into another of my old gripes. How closely can you actually simulate this? And more importantly, is it still fun? We see this in the tabletop world. The war games that simulate combat directly, like really grittily and noodly, are much less popular than the abstract ones. It's just not fun to look up endless tables to see if my M1 Abrams can go through the side armour of your Leclerc. Well, I find that quite a lot of fun, but I'm told that most people don't. So that's it. RTS hit the limits. Actions beyond the scope of humans already. Challenging bots, we completed it. Graphics, they were good enough in 2008. And settings, either sacrificed on the altar of history buffs or just absorbed into the already wide plethora of settings that have been covered. Here's a last little bit of hope. One of the few RTS games to be released recently is The Last Train Home. This is set during the March of the Czech Legions, an event outside of the Czech populace barely known, but if you search March of the Czech Legions on YouTube, you'll find a plethora of content. Has our increasing knowledge of history opened up new niche settings for the RTS genre? Could it be that we are at a dawn of a new age where indie developers exploit the increasing knowledge of history to bring us new, fresh RTS games? Where our increasing knowledge of history and how to represent it and people's interests form the dividing line between the games of the Golden Age and the games of a new, exciting era of the real-time strategy game.
There are many different RTS games out there, and liking one doesn't necessarily mean you'll like any other. Small differences in pacing, military versus economy leaning, or reliance on APM can change the feel of an RTS. I think players have found the games that they like, invested a lot of time in getting good at them, and therefore don't feel the urge to try out new games in the genre. I know I'm certainly guilty of that. Because of this, these new games don't get made, or the games that do are too focused on the hardcore competitive multiplayer to attract a new audience. When Age of Empires 4 came out, a large proportion of the AoE community gave it a go, but for many, the changes were too much, and it felt unnaturally similar, but unfamiliar. It's a similar story with Homeworld 3 and Company of Heroes 3. I don't think we'll get a new popular RTS game rivaling StarCraft 2 or Age of Empires 2 for a long time, but as Matt mentioned, maybe the future of the genre is in more precise games telling one particular story.
Because the echo will be me rather than the word, and that's the gag. In case anyone doesn't get that.
I'll eat my salad later. Do you like the lighting? I worked very hard. I will cry if you say it's bad. I mean, how many 95-year-olds are we going to have in our audience?